Hi, I'm Shan Wu with an undercolor of law hot take on some of the developments with these voter suppression and election interference cases. So the Georgia Supreme Court has refused to stay a good ruling by a Georgia trial court, which helped defeat a bunch of attempts to suppress voting in Georgia. Now, we've discussed this before, but in particular, this case, there are like 7 instances that the trial court struck down, is a really great example of the methods of what I call modern voter suppression. It varies from our kind of historical, more brute force attempts at voter suppression, which actually still exist today. But let's just run down this for a moment because I want to get to some of the underlying points of what's going on with these attempts to stop people from voting. So some of these that really stand out to me well, first, let's start with this. These cases are really complicated, and in order for the trial court to get through it, the judge had to first unravel issues like standing, separation of powers at both the state constitutional level as well as the federal constitutional level. I point that out not to be too much of a legal nerd, but to point out the fact that when these kinds of issues arise during an election, after the election, it raises a lot of legal complexities, which gives time and opportunity for a lot of mischief to go on. So that's something we need to be very well aware of. This is not something that just quickly comes up, easily decided like a slam dunk. The final decision is a slam dunk against these attempts, but it takes a process to get through there. So one of the first things that I really was struck by, and I've mentioned it before, is this notion that these rules weren't in the Georgia law and they tried to give too much power to the state election board. One of the things that was struck down was a provision that would allow any member of the board to make available to any individual member of the county board all election-related documentation created during the conduct of the elections prior to certification results. You can imagine what a nightmare that could be in terms of causing delay. And as the trial court properly termed it, it was a statutorily unbounded scope under which these officials could consider unauthorized materials about tabulating, canvassing from any type of source. So it really would just give them carte blanche to interfere with the election. Also, it was struck down a requirement that video surveillance and recording be done for authorized drop boxes after polls were closed. Most importantly, I mean, maybe that sounds like not a bad precaution, but most importantly, the rule attempted to say if you didn't have that kind of video surveillance, that the election board could remove and close any drop box that wasn't monitored. I mean, talk about stealing votes. What would happen to those votes that were already in the drop boxes? Now, in this particular instance, with the Georgia Supreme Court upholding these good rulings, this bunch of cases and issues is still number 1 on the Just Security's top 10 election cases. Put up that link for everyone because it's a great way to keep track of some of the issues that are going on around the country. You know, when you review these top 10 cases, there's a real similarity of so many of them, and that's the theme I want to point out here. For example, number 2 on the list is a challenge in multiple states where Republicans are trying to question how overseas and military voters can submit their ballots. In Pennsylvania, there are challenges to people not being able to be notified if their mail-in ballots are rejected. So you wouldn't know the challenge because you're never told. And in Alabama, the Justice Department has brought a challenge, yay, to new rules in Alabama that the DOJ felt took place too close to the actual election. This is the so-called 90-day quiet rule. You can't like make big changes at the last minute. And the federal court issued an injunction blocking a purge of voter rolls. DOJ has brought a similar suit in Virginia. And in Mississippi, there's a case pending at the Federal Court of Appeals where there's a challenge to mail-in ballot receipt deadlines as being unconstitutional. 2 more notable cases In Arizona, there's a court that has ruled the state election procedures manual wasn't being followed because it says that voters who go to the wrong precinct should be given the opportunity to cast a ballot and have that ballot counted. And they're going to do away with that. Now, I can tell you from my own experience as a poll observer, which I volunteered to do a few times, in a previous election, I've always been struck by the extraordinary number of people who don't know where they should be going to do their vote. In fact, I remember a few years ago when I brought my mom to a voting place, even though we lived very close to each other, she was in the wrong place. We had to go somewhere different. So there'll be people trying to get their vote in. They might be in line. They get in and it's too late to go someplace else. First of all, a big part of this problem is we make voting way too confusing. It's too hard to get registered. It's improving, but it's got to get much better. But by eliminating people who go to the wrong place, making it hard for them to vote, it's yet another way to cut down on the number of voters. And then lastly, I'd note this. There's a case in September that was filed challenging Georgia's new law in which a civil rights group was asking the court to block a provision that allows a private citizen to challenge another voter's eligibility. And of course, state and national branches of the Republican Party are weighing in, trying to help in favor of that idea that anyone can just challenge someone else's right to vote. So, it makes one wonder, why is there such an effort to reduce the number of voters? Again, we get the idea of simple sort of racist suppression, don't let black people in to vote, trying to intimidate minority voters by having the police at the polling places. But there's something else going on here, right? I mean, it's simply trying to reduce the number of voters, making it harder to vote, not necessarily knowing, whether these are women, whether they're minorities or not. I mean, there's still threats. I mean, Trump has made the threat about they should have police at the polling places to discourage people from voting. Maybe they're worried about police being there. It's intimidating. But where does this really come from, this idea that it's so important to reduce the number of people? Well, take a listen to this clip that makes it really clear. This is historian Carol Anderson from Emory University talking about this phenomenon. Take a listen, and I'll talk to you on the other side.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
To understand the language of voter fraud and voter suppression that's going on now, that's the framework. That our leverage, our power increases when the voting populace is constrained.
So when I saw that clip and I saw that conservative activist speaking so clearly, and I thought, wow, he just put it exactly right. And I thought, who is this guy? And he speaks so clearly and in such a bad way, but he just puts it right out there. They want there to be less people voting because that helps them. So he was a conservative activist who actually founded the Heritage Foundation and also helped to start up the Moral Majority movement, really one of the founders of the modern right movement. And he makes it very clear that what is important is to have less people voting to help their causes. The Heritage Foundation, it's kind of interesting, just today I heard that they were instrumental in getting Ruth Ben-Ghiat disinvited to a history lecture. She's a great historian, friend of mine, who specializes in talking about authoritarian dictatorships and makes the case of Trump being exactly like that. I mean, some people say it's like he read some of her books and he's using it like a playbook. Well, she was disinvited from the Naval Academy because of pressure from Project 2025 and from the Heritage Foundation. So they're still extremely active in many ways that you may not hear about, and they can exert a lot of pressure on our modern institutions. So something to keep in mind is when you hear conservatives, Republicans, and the right talking about how important it is to have voter turnout, you got to think about what that means. I mean, I've said previously that it's so important to go to the polls because when you don't, what that means is the side that gets their people to come out is going to be the side that wins. So it's not a protest vote or anything to sit it out. It just means that whoever gets their people out is going to win. So no question, the right is trying to get their people out to vote. At the same time, though, what they want to do is to reduce generally the number of people. And so you really have to take it with a grain of salt when you hear them talking about them being in favor of increasing the voting percentages in America, because honestly, they don't want to do that. They certainly want their candidate to win, but they don't want America to have a higher percentage of people voting. They don't want more people to participate in our democracy. They want just the opposite. The less people, the better. Just ask one of their founding fathers. So that's it for now. Thanks for tuning in. We're very excited to be here on the Legal AF channel, and hopefully we will keep hearing from you. Those replies and comments are super helpful. Look forward to talking to you soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.